Late one scorching summer afternoon in East Los Angeles, the streets smoldered with heat and tension, sidewalks shimmering with a haze that seemed to twist reality. Everywhere you looked, the city thrummed with noise, car horns, distant salsa rhythms booming from passing vehicles, and the sharp calls of street vendors hawking tamales and tacos. In an unremarkable corner of this sprawling urban jungle stood a battered food truck decorated with colorful murals of dancing peppers, a place known for serving the best quesadillas in the neighborhood. On this day, two iconic figures, Mike Tyson and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, happened to be strolling through, drawn by rumors of mouth-watering street food. Dressed comfortably to beat the sweltering heat, they looked like ordinary guys seeking a meal in a busy city. But appearances can be misleading, for these two men possessed power and skill that far surpassed even the toughest local toughs. A secret not immediately apparent to everyone around them. Neither Mike Tyson nor The Rock had come looking for trouble. They had been in a nearby district meeting with a producer about a possible charity event, and after concluding their business, their stomachs growled in unison. The tantalizing aroma of sizzling beef and fresh tortillas had them pivot toward a small taco stand. Yet, unbeknownst to them, trouble had been brewing for weeks in this patch of East LA. A notoriously territorial and racist gang, known as Los Sables, had been expanding its reach, tightening its hold on the streets like a noose. For years, Los Sables extorted local shops, intimidated new arrivals, and instilled fear in anyone they deemed different. Led by a short but imposing man nicknamed Gabriel El Gato Salazar, who wore a perpetual sneer that distorted his tattooed features. The gang prided themselves on making life miserable for outsiders. It only took a glance from El Gato to set the scene for mayhem. He and his men lurked near a low-slung cherry-red car, parked crookedly beside the curb, puffing on cheap cigarettes that drew wisps of smoke in the oven-like air. The music thumping from the car stereo was discordant, a harsh counterpoint to the usual neighborhood bustle. When Mike Tyson and The Rock stepped into view, bantering about their cravings for spicy tacos and ice-cold sodas, El Gato took immediate notice. His eyes narrowed with hostility. He recognized celebrities when he saw them, but he also despised anyone whose presence might undermine his gang's perceived superiority. Leaning against the car, El Gato jerked his head to signal his closest associate, Navarro, whose arms and neck bore elaborate tattoos depicting serpents, daggers, and skulls. Navarro spat on the ground and murmured something under his breath, prompting a low round of laughter from the rest of the crew. The taunts escalated quickly, with the gang unleashing insults in sneering Spanish slang. They mocked how Hollywood types should not wander around their turf if they valued their well-being. Mike Tyson, always keenly perceptive, caught the first whiff of hostility in the air. He paused in his tracks, one eyebrow arched, and glanced sideways at The Rock. The Rock, feeling the burn of threatening stares, shrugged with exaggerated casualness. Their easy smiles gave way to clenched jaws, as both men understood, with an unspoken bond forged through many battles, that conflict was imminent. Neither wanted a brawl, certainly not when they were hungry. But they also knew there was no point trying to reason with men whose arrogance was stoked by hatred. The standoff began quietly, like the stillness before a desert storm. The humid air clung to the streets, making everyone sweat, while the gang members felt emboldened by their numbers. There were 6 or 7 of them, all bristling with pent-up aggression, their eyes darting between Mike Tyson and The Rock, searching for any sign of vulnerability. Yet the two legends were not new to confrontation. The tension that electrified the moment was as familiar to them as a punch hitting a heavy bag. They stood calmly, each in his own brand of composure. Tyson's posture hinted at the explosive potential coiled in his frame, while The Rock exuded a cool confidence, his large arms folding over his massive chest. El Gato, rubbing the tattoos on his forearm as though warming up for a fight, finally stepped forward. His voice, dripping with contempt, cut through the balmy silence. "¿Qué pasa, amigos?" You're a long way from Hollywood." A cynical grin carved itself into his face, and the rest of Los Sables howled in mean-spirited amusement. Most passers-by gave the group a wide berth, sensing that violence hovered in the atmosphere like a vulture. One of the younger gang members, brazen and probably itching to prove himself, decided he needed to take the first swing. He had the look of a raw recruit, gang patches on a denim vest, fresh tattoos that hadn't yet faded under the harsh sun, and a swagger that was more show than substance. Without warning, he attempted to shove the rock, aiming both hands squarely at the big man's chest, as if to topple him backward. But pushing the rock was about as effective as trying to move a concrete wall with a gentle breeze. The teenager's eyes ballooned in shock when the rock didn't budge. A flash of displeasure crossed the rock's face. He had not wanted to make a scene, but the stench of aggression was impossible to ignore. With an economy of motion that spoke volumes of his power, he lunged forward and delivered a thunderous right hook to the gang member's midsection. The blow landed like a sledgehammer smashing a crate. The youngster collapsed, gasping for air, the wind cleanly knocked from his lungs. At once, his bravado melted away into pain and disorientation. The rest of Los Sables paused for a heart-pounding second, stunned by how effortlessly one of their own had been dropped. Mike Tyson seized that window of opportunity, his instincts sharp as ever. Another thug lunged at him with a half-drawn switchblade, a misguided attempt to show the group that they weren't cowed. In an instant, Tyson shifted his weight, weaving to the side. With a crackling burst of power, he delivered a left hook that connected with the thug's jaw so hard it sounded like a tree branch snapping in an ice storm. The knife clattered to the asphalt, and its owner fell in a limp heap, eyes fluttering as if searching for focus in a swirling, dizzy world. That was all it took for the tension to explode into chaos. The gang members realized this wouldn't be a one-sided beating in their favor. It was they who stood on the brink of humiliation. Those still upright gawked at each other with uncertain eyes. Should they run? Should they stay? Their leader, El Gato, clenched his jaw, unwilling to lose face in front of the neighborhood. Violence, once a cruel pastime for these men, had suddenly become a potential nightmare. El Gato refused to let the fear of facing these two formidable opponents show. He spat on the ground, the gritty saliva landing near Tyson's feet. "You messed with the wrong barrio," he snarled, his tone an ugly mix of rage and arrogance. Tyson's eyes, still ice-cold from his sudden shift into combat mode, flickered with annoyance. For a moment, it was as if the street around them vanished, leaving only the swirl of adrenaline in the humid air. A second gang member, presumably older and more seasoned than the first fool who had tried to push the rock, launched himself at Tyson. He aimed a wild swing at the boxer's head, hoping to catch him off guard. But Tyson, with the honed reflexes of countless ring wars, ducked effortlessly. His left hand snapped out in a lightning-fast jab that caught the thug under the eye, drawing a sharp yelp of pain. Before the man could retaliate, a short, savage uppercut rocketed up from Tyson's torso, blasting the thug's chin so fiercely that his feet left the ground for a beat. He crashed back to earth like a bag of cement, limp and dazed. On the other side of the makeshift battlefield, the Rock found himself confronting two thugs simultaneously, each armed with short metal rods. They waved their weapons menacingly, inching closer with guarded steps, evidently unsure how best to attack a man who radiated such raw physical presence. The pair circled him like hyenas testing a lion, believing numbers might tip the scales in their favor. The Rock's eyes flicked back and forth, measuring angles, anticipating which one would strike first. Suddenly, one thug feinted a blow to the Rock's ribs, while the other lunged at his head. Quick as a flash, the Rock spun aside, deflecting the high strike with a forearm that felt more like an iron bar than muscle. He retaliated by driving a punishing knee into the assailant's gut. The man collapsed with a miserable groan, dropping his rod to cradle his stomach. Meanwhile, the Rock caught the second man's attempt to swing at his back by swiveling around and delivering a palm strike to the side of his head that sounded like a gunshot in the enclosed city street. Witnessing his crew being systematically dismantled, Elgato's fury escalated. His hand shot to the waistband of his sagging jeans, fingers brushing the handle of a pistol. Tyson spotted the movement, recognized the lethal glint in Elgato's narrowed eyes, and reacted with the lethal precision he had perfected through an entire lifetime of grit and conflict. In the blink of an eye, Tyson sprang forward and caught Elgato by the wrist before the gun even cleared the fabric. With a twisting motion, he forced the gangster's arm upward. The pistol fired with a deafening crack, the bullet shattering the neon sign of a corner store behind them instead of striking a human target. Elgato's face morphed from triumphant malice to sheer panic, contorted by the realization that he'd lost the upper hand. Tyson wasted no time. He slammed a devastating hook into Elgato's ribs, prompting the gang leader to howl in agony. The man doubled over, dropping the pistol, the clang of the weapon hitting asphalt resonating ominously. Tyson pinned him to the hood of a nearby parked car. All around them, other gang members scattered like roaches, their illusions of dominating the confrontation wrecked. But when the battered remains of Los Sables thought they could retreat and regroup in peace, they forgot one critical fact. There were two unstoppable forces in their midst, not just one. Just when it looked like Elgato might lose consciousness under Tyson's iron grip, the screech of tires ripped through the humid night air. Headlights cut across the cracked pavement as a fleet of vehicles barreled around the corner, filling the narrow street. People who had been watching from doorways and upper-story windows scrambled for cover, knowing that whenever Los Sables called in reinforcements, the situation could escalate into gunfire or worse. From the leading car, a primer black lowrider with flickering neon under its chassis, stepped Navarro, Elgato's right-hand man and second in command, who'd been away during the initial conflict. Navarro was tall and wiry, with a face etched by scars and malevolent pride. Several of the battered gang members hobbled toward him, breathless, their eyes pleading for backup. Meanwhile, Elgato, pinned and furious, coughed out a guttural order. "Take them out." Flanked by half a dozen additional thugs who came spilling from two more vehicles, Navarro surveyed the carnage. Mike Tyson and The Rock still standing at the center, ready for more. The newly arrived gang members bristled with aggression, brandishing bats, knives, and some handguns. The tension snapped taut as an overstretched cable. Here in these streets, logic and caution often drowned under a tide of pride and violence, and there was no room left for negotiation. Yet The Rock remained calm, feeding on the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He glanced at Tyson, who offered a tight nod of readiness. The two men had performed countless stunts in their public lives. Tyson dominating in the boxing ring, The Rock in the wrestling arena and action films, but none of that overshadowed the real combat instincts they'd cultivated from youth, from neighborhoods where fists often settled disputes. Now that experience came roaring back. Navarro issued a chilling laugh, brandishing a gleaming blade that caught the harsh fluorescence of a corner lamp. "Your time's up," he hissed in heavily accented English. "You came into our home, and now you pay." The words reeked of confidence. He believed that, with superior numbers, Los Sables could crush the two interlopers and reclaim the sense of invincibility that had been stripped away mere minutes earlier. With a fluid motion reminiscent of a choreographed dance, The Rock and Mike Tyson repositioned themselves, each defending the other's flank. It was a formation they'd never practiced officially, yet it felt natural, as if they were a tag team stepping into a ring. Their presence was enough to give even Navarro pause. For a heartbeat, no one moved, the street suspended in a hush. Then one gun-toting member fired a shot. The bullet whooshed past Tyson's shoulder, embedding itself in the plaster of a graffiti-covered wall behind him. That single gunshot served as the signal for full-blown chaos. Thugs lunged forward, brandishing their makeshift arsenal. The Rock snatched a lead pipe that one attacker swung at his ribs, then used it like a battering ram to slam the man's midsection. Nearby, Tyson bobbed and weaved through a hail of fists and blades, delivering crippling punches that exploded on impact. One gangster tried to tackle the boxer around the legs. Tyson responded with a savage downward blow that sent him rolling face first across the asphalt. As the frenzied battle raged, Elgato wheezed against the car where Tyson had initially pinned him. Staggering to his feet, he spat blood and rage into the gutter, then hobbled toward Navarro. Together, they and a few others began to encircle the two legends, hoping that attacking from all sides might overwhelm them. Mike Tyson caught a glimpse of Elgato's twisted expression and realized the man would never retreat willingly. Their only chance at true safety was to vanquish these criminals so decisively that they wouldn't dare return. Steel pipes clanged, and the stink of burning rubber rose when one driver, intent on intimidation, spun his muscle car in circles, the tires shrieking like banshees. The swirling smoke provided brief cover for some of Los Sable's men to advance unseen. The Rock, tearing his gaze away from a dazed opponent crumpled by the curb, squinted through the veil of smoke. He sensed movement, shadows flitting, silhouettes crouching low, and realized they were attempting to flank him. Reacting on pure instinct, the Rock surged forward, drawing his massive arm back in a hooking blow aimed at the first silhouette that emerged from the smoke. The punch connected with a meaty thud that sent the attacker flying several feet, his limp body nearly toppling another thug behind him. From the gloom, Navarro lunged, blade aiming for the Rock's kidney. But the Rock twisted his torso, the blade missing by mere inches, and then seized Navarro's wrist in an iron grip. A quick, brutal headbutt disoriented the second-in-command, driving him backward with blood trickling from a fresh cut on his forehead. Not to be overshadowed, Tyson engaged in a relentless game of cat and mouse with three gang members who moved in a triangular pattern around him. One jabbed with a blade at his midsection, forcing him to pivot. Another tried to smash his head from behind with a wooden bat. Tyson's acute peripheral vision kicked in. He ducked at the precise moment, and the bat whistled through empty air. In a seamless sequence, Tyson unleashed a vicious right cross on the bat wielder's jaw, the impact reverberating through his fist. The attacker's eyes glazed over, and he sank to his knees in a daze. The second man advanced, arcs of light reflecting off a steel pipe. He swung horizontally at Tyson's torso. Tyson hopped back, letting the pipe slash the air harmlessly. Before the thug could correct his stance, Tyson countered with a short, punishing uppercut to the ribcage, feeling the shock of bone on bone. The blow forced a ragged wheeze from the assailant's lungs. The gangster folded over like a torn puppet. Out of the haze, Elgato's roar pierced the clamor. He had regrouped, ignoring his battered ribs and the bruises forming along his jawline. In his hand, he now held a machete, its long blade glinting under the streetlights. The battered gang leader charged Tyson, eyes wild with hatred. For a man who had just been beaten to the brink of collapse, Elgato displayed a fanatical dedication to reclaiming his reputation. Tyson braced himself, eyes narrowing as he calculated the incoming slash. Timing his reaction, he swerved to the side, letting the machete slice through empty space. He seized Elgato's forearm with the swiftness of a cobra strike, twisted it violently, and delivered a knee straight to the gang leader's abdomen. Elgato gasped, rage flickering to fear, but somehow clung to the machete's handle. Over near the swirling tire smoke, the Rock had pinned Navarro to the graffiti-strewn wall of a closed bodega. Navarro kicked and hissed insults, but the Rock kept him in place with a forearm pressed against his chest. The second-in-command's blade lay useless on the ground. "You're done," the Rock growled, breath ragged yet controlled. In response, Navarro spat in the Rock's face, a desperate, defiant act. Without missing a beat, the Rock slammed Navarro's head against the wall with just enough force to send him into a dazed slump, not unconscious, but too dizzy to fight effectively. All told, the street was littered with battered gang members crawling or lying prone, their moans of pain harmonizing with distant sirens that hinted at approaching law enforcement. Yet even as some tried to slink away, there was an unspoken anticipation in the grimy air, a sense that the final act had not yet arrived. That's when the monstrous enforcer emerged, stepping from the newly arrived vehicle with a sense of dread that silenced every other sound. He was known on the streets by a name whispered with unease, Euphoria. His shaved head displayed an elaborate skull tattoo that stretched across his scalp, and his shoulders were the size of boulders, each movement radiating a brute strength. Muscles corded his arms, marked by jagged scars, as though his flesh had been tested in countless previous battles. This was the ace Los Sables had kept back for truly dire situations. El Gato, even while half collapsed, recognized his last hope. He coughed out an order, voice quaking with barely restrained desperation. El Furia, finish them! The Rock and Mike Tyson exchanged knowing glances. They had already thrashed 2 waves of gang members, but this man's approach felt different. There was an aura of menace around him, reminiscent of a seasoned fighter who had never learned restraint, one who embraced violence wholeheartedly. "Hey, big guy," The Rock muttered, letting out a low whistle. "This one looks like trouble." Tyson, sweat glistening along his brow, nodded grimly. "We've taken down plenty of big guys, but let's stay sharp." Euphoria responded with a guttural laugh that echoed in the near-empty street. Then he charged, arms spread wide, fists clenched, like a bull unleashed. He aimed a massive punch at the Rock's ribcage, forcing the legend to block hastily. The impact rattled the Rock's forearms, a reminder that they were dealing with a new level of raw power. Before the Rock could retaliate, Euphoria whirled around, swinging an elbow that caught the big man's shoulder with a meaty thud. While the Rock reeled from the blow, Mike Tyson slipped behind Euphoria, launching a swift combination aimed at the enforcer's kidney and side. Tyson's fists pounded with the signature force that had once terrified heavyweight contenders. But Euphoria, unlike his fellow gang members, was not easily dropped. He merely grunted, acknowledging the pain, and twisted with surprising agility to backhand Tyson in the temple. The blow rocked the former boxer, who staggered momentarily, vision flickering. Sensing a chance to deliver a finishing strike, Euphoria cocked one giant fist and swung downward, hoping to crush Tyson's skull. At the last possible instant, Tyson dodged, the blow smashing into the pavement with a crack that sent shards of asphalt flying. Tyson then countered, unleashing a furious uppercut that clipped Euphoria's chin. Although it snapped the enforcer's head back, it still wasn't enough to topple him. Sensing Mike was in danger, The Rock seized the moment. He barreled forward, hooking his arms around Euphoria's waist in a tackle that resembled a pro wrestling maneuver, but packed every ounce of real-world force he could summon. The collision drove Euphoria several paces back, heels scraping the street, until they slammed into a parked car, denting the door. Yet Euphoria refused to yield. The gang enforcer landed a ferocious knee into The Rock's abdomen, causing him to grunt in pain. Suddenly free, Euphoria swung back toward Tyson, who was regaining his footing. Mike braced himself, face hardened with the kind of determination that arises when a fighter meets a truly formidable foe. This was no random street thug. This was a man who fought like an apex predator. What followed was a brutal ballet of raw power. Euphoria advanced on Tyson, throwing hammer-like punches that forced Mike on the defensive, weaving and bobbing as though he were back in the ring with a prime heavyweight challenger. Each time Tyson tried to slip inside to land his signature hook, Euphoria would lash out with a headbutt or elbow, using every dirty trick in the book to keep Tyson off balance. It was a savage display, and for a moment, it seemed the advantage belonged to Los Sables' monstrous enforcer. But The Rock wasn't about to let Tyson fight alone. Shaking off the lingering ache in his ribs, he re-entered the fray from Euphoria's blind side. Timing a moment when Euphoria's fists were busy forcing Tyson to block high, The Rock lunged in low, driving a shoulder into the enforcer's midsection. The two collided with a force that made bystanders reel in astonishment. Euphoria stumbled, but as he did, he brought his meaty fist down on The Rock's back. The blow reverberated like a thunderclap, sending The Rock down to one knee, Mike Tyson wasted no time capitalizing on the opening. With Alforia's attention momentarily split, Tyson unleashed a swift, demolishing body shot that landed just above Alforia's hip. The enforcer let out a strangled grunt, and Tyson followed it with a rapid left hook to the jaw. The combined strikes rocked Alforia's massive frame. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty flashed in his cold eyes, as if he was beginning to sense the unstoppable synergy between these two legends. "Finish him!" Elgato rasped from the sidelines, still struggling to stand, clutching his bruised ribs. The battered remains of Los Sables watched anxiously, clinging to the hope that this living weapon, their last resort, could somehow turn the tide in their favor. A few tried to inch closer, perhaps thinking they could lend Alfuria some sort of backup, but one glare from the behemoth signaled that he wanted no interference. Alfuria shook off the latest hits, letting out a roar like a caged lion. He spun toward the rock, determined to break the superstar in half. He swung his arm in a wide arc, the blow cutting through the air. The rock ducked, the fist grazing his shoulder. Summoning his own monstrous strength, the rock retaliated by driving an uppercut into Alfuria's sternum. The impact forced the enforcer to stagger, lungs struggling to draw breath. At the very same instant, Tyson closed in like a hungry predator. His fists unleashed a chain of brutal punches that hammered Alfuria's ribs, chest, and shoulders. The enforcer tried to lash out, but the hailstorm of blows was relentless. Each shot carried the weight of a champion's experience, precise, swift, and forged by countless hours in the ring. Alfuria's defenses began to crumble. The final blow arrived in a flurry. Tyson's legendary right hook smashed into Alfuria's jaw, while the rock slammed a forearm into the giant's throat. The two-pronged attack destroyed whatever remained of Alfuria's balance. His eyes widened in shock before he dropped to his knees, then collapsed forward onto the pavement with a mighty thud that seemed to ripple across the entire block. A hush settled, as though all of East LA paused to bear witness to the event. For a long beat, no one moved. Alfuria lay sprawled, chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged bursts. Then Los Sables realized the impossible had happened. Their unbreakable champion had been broken. Some threw curses at Tyson and the Rock. Others tried to help Alfuria, and still others scrambled into whatever vehicles they could find, determined to vanish before the cops arrived. Elgato, once so certain of his gang's dominance, stared at the crumpled form of Alfuria with disbelief etched onto every line of his bruised face. Fear slithered into his eyes, replacing the arrogance that had led him to challenge these legendary fighters. His foot inched backward, edging toward a rusted sedan that idled at the curb, engine running. A quick glance toward the battered remnants of Los Sables confirmed what he already knew. Their morale had been shattered. Mike Tyson, breathing heavily but still exuding formidable presence, turned his attention toward Elgato. He took a few measured steps, stepping over a groaning gang member who clutched a busted arm. The boxer's voice, low and menacing, echoed with enough authority to hush the bystanders. "You wanted us gone," Tyson growled. "But maybe you should have learned some respect first." Fear contorted Elgato's features, but a desperate pride still glimmered in his eyes. "This is our neighborhood," he spat, though the words lacked the venom they once possessed. "We own these streets. You—" Before he could finish, the Rock closed in from the other side. Arms folded across his heaving chest, he looked every bit the unstoppable force. "You don't own anything," he said coolly, glancing at the destroyed cars, the unconscious or whimpering thugs, the shattered confidence all around. "All I see is a group of bullies who picked the wrong guys to mess with." If there was any glint of bravado left in Elgato, it vanished under those words. His eyes flickered to the massive silhouette of Alfuria lying unmoving on the ground, then to Navarro, who was slumped against a wall, barely conscious. The rest of his crew either hobbled away or lay sprawled on the pavement. He knew that the battle was lost. Swallowing his bruised ego, Elgato slowly raised his hands, not quite in surrender, but enough to show that he had no fight left. Tyson and The Rock shared a nod, each reading the situation perfectly. They stood tall, sweat streaming down faces and arms, chest heaving in tandem, with the ragged breath of warriors who just battled a small army. Every muscle ached, but the satisfaction of triumph brought them an almost tangible aura of power. Only the distant sirens, the wail of police cruisers, and maybe an ambulance or two hinted that this night of violence would end in legal inquiries and statements. With careful steps, Elgato eased into his sedan. He muttered a threat in Spanish, something about revenge, something about how Los Sables would never forget. But his tone was hollow. He and 3 remaining gang members sped off, taillights flickering like dying embers in the oppressive darkness. The inert forms of the less fortunate gang members littered the area, some moaning and some silent. Nearby, a group of onlookers slowly ventured out of shops and doorways, their faces a mix of awe, disbelief, and maybe even a touch of gratitude. Mike Tyson turned to The Rock, wiping sweat from his brow. "Can we get those tacos now?" he asked, managing a crooked grin. "I'm about to drop from hunger." The Rock let out a deep chuckle, rolling his shoulders and trying to ease the stiffness in his neck. "Yeah, brother," he replied. "I think we've earned a feast." As the clang of distant sirens drew closer, the legends took a moment to gather themselves. In the aftermath of that chaotic brawl, the street looked like a war zone. Windows were cracked or shattered from stray bullets, the pavement was littered with shards of metal and broken glass, and the acrid scent of burnt rubber lingered. A battered low rider, doors dented beyond repair, sat abandoned in the center of the road, its headlights flickering ominously. Gang members, some conscious enough to stagger away, disappeared into alleys like ghosts, preferring to flee rather than face the law. Others lay curled in pain, waiting for paramedics to tend to their injuries, or the police to slap on cuffs. Yet in this bruised and shaken community, a strange hush fell. Curiosity overcame fear, and people emerged from behind barred windows and locked doors, stepping gingerly into the night's carnage. A bold few, emboldened by the knowledge that Los Sables had been humbled, approached Mike Tyson and The Rock. Their faces held gratitude and relief, but also caution. After all, East LA had long memories. Seeing a street gang so soundly defeated by 2 outsiders was not an everyday occurrence. A shopkeeper, older and stooped with age, placed a trembling hand on Tyson's arm and thanked him. A mother clutching a sleepy toddler merely nodded at The Rock, eyes damp, as if she wished she could say more but had no words left. The Rock inhaled deeply, absorbing the moment. He glanced at Tyson, who offered a faint, knowing smile. Despite their fierce reputations, both men understood that violence, no matter how justified, left scars on a community. They quietly hoped their display of strength might deter future bloodshed, but they also knew how cycles of vengeance could thrive in these neighborhoods. Somewhere out there, Elgato and Navarro would be nursing their bruises, plotting retaliation, or slipping deeper into the underworld. And while El Furia might remain out of commission for a while, there was no telling what lines the gang might cross next time. Still, for now, the immediate threat had been quelled. When the first squad cars screeched to a halt, red and blue lights bathing the cracked pavement, Tyson and The Rock calmly raised their hands, showing no intention to resist. Officers poured out, firearms at the ready, scanning the scene of chaos. It took a short while, and the input of half a dozen bystanders, before the cops realized who the real aggressors had been. A few recognized The Rock immediately, stammering something about his blockbuster roles. Another recalled Tyson's iconic face tattoo and ring achievements. The confusion was tangible, but eventually, the truth of the night's battle emerged from the bruised and battered evidence all around. One sergeant, arms crossed over a bulletproof vest, asked the pair to recount what had happened. Tyson, still rubbing the soreness in his shoulder, explained in clipped detail how the conflict had started with insults, escalated to threats, and ended in the catastrophic showdown. The Rock added a few clarifying remarks, never once seeking to shift blame or glorify their actions. He simply told it like it was. They had been ambushed, they defended themselves, and the violence spiraled out of control until the gang fled. After a series of additional questions and the arrival of EMTs who began tending to the injured, the officers escorted Tyson and The Rock off to the side, away from gawking civilians. The two legends knew they might need to give detailed statements at the precinct, but the police also knew that the community had effectively been shielded from a far worse scenario. Sometimes, such cosmic alignments happen in a city's darkest corners. The right people cross paths with the wrong criminals and order is restored, even if temporarily. When at last an exasperated officer told them they could leave, provided they remained reachable for further questioning, Tyson and The Rock exchanged grateful nods. Wordlessly, they stepped away from the smoldering remnants of the epic street brawl. As they neared the battered food truck, still open, miraculously unaffected by gunfire or stray fists, the vendor greeted them with trembling hands. Softly, he offered them fresh tacos on the house, stammering that they deserved it after risking their lives. Mike Tyson and The Rock each accepted the humble gift, that mouth-watering scent filling their nostrils. For a moment, all the tension and violence seemed to fade into the background. Taking those first bites, they savored the explosion of flavors. The tortillas were warm, the meat perfectly spiced, and the salsa just hot enough to bring tears to their eyes. But not from pain or fear. This moment tasted of relief, a fleeting peace in a neighborhood too often clouded by strife. They had come here just to grab a bite, never expecting to become embroiled in a battle that would leave half a gang battered in their wake. And now, satiated both by food and the knowledge that they had done a right thing in the wrong circumstances, they quietly planned to slip away into the night. Even as they finished their tacos and exchanged thanks with the grateful vendor, neither Tyson nor The Rock could ignore the watchful eyes peering from windows and alleyways. Whispers about their heroic stand would spread, carrying a cautionary tale about how two outsiders turned a gang's stranglehold into dust. And while the rumor mill in East LA seldom told the whole truth, the legend of how Mike Tyson and The Rock broke Los Sables, along with their unstoppable enforcer, was sure to linger. If Los Sables dared to rise again, they would forever remember the scorching night they encountered two of the toughest fighters on earth, and discovered too late that some battles should never be waged.